All right, we don't have too many on board yet, but it's time to start with Hayom Yom, 11th of Shvat. Here's the Yom Yom. The routine of the day begins with saying Moida Ani. I acknowledge, Moida, acknowledge before you, living and eternal King. This is said before the morning washing of the hands, even while the hands are impure. So this is a big teaching. Because all the impurities in the world do not defile the I acknowledge of a Jew. In other words, the essence of a Jew, the Pintele Yid, the source of the Ava Misoteres, the hidden love, the Chochma that we've been speaking about, the Koyach Ma of a Jew, is never adulterated, never changed. It's a offspring, if you could say such a thing, of Hashem himself, who says, Hashem, Ani lo shenisi, I don't change. So that power, when you say Moida Ani, that's way above bruchas, way above learning. It's part and parcel of what's above and transcends the consciousness, the conscious aspects of a person is something that's implanted deep in the essence, and nothing can touch that. He might lack one thing or another, but his Moida Ani remains intact. That's Hayom Yom. So this begins, actually, it's a good introduction to the Tanya that we're learning today, where we've been talking about the metaphor of speech as it is in the actuality of speech as it is in us, and the metaphorical meaning that applies to Hashem. The metaphorical meaning is that which God creates and everything that comes into being is, the Torah tells us, using the metaphor of speech. And that's equivalent to ourselves. We externalize, we have relationships to the outside world through speech and other things as well, but I'm kind of focusing on speech. And then there's a big difference we learned yesterday, that in ourselves, the speech actually goes out of our mouths, and it's not part of us. Once I blow my wind out into the air, it's in the air, and in these little letters that I'm speaking. God's speak never goes outside of himself because there's no place free of him. There's nothing besides him. There's nothing outside of him. And so there's a presence of godliness that's extant in everything. And now we're going to turn to, as we've been speaking about, this book is an instruction book, how to tap that, where to tap that. And that's what we're going to start today in chapter 23, page 297 in this Lessons in Tanya, and page Koyach, 28, Perek Chav Gimel.
Rabbi Kamen?
Yes.
Is it possible that we could do this learning for the Aliyah Neshama of Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz, Shliach, whose Yortzeit is tonight? Have that in mind.
Of course we could do it for that. Do you have any more, of any fullness of his name? Is that any more? Shlomo ben, no?
Shlomo Yitzhak ben, maybe,
Shlomo.
Not sure of the father's name, but it is Shlomo Yitzhak.
Shlomo Yitzhak, Neshama Zal Haben and Aliyah, and Poel Yeshuas Bekerev Haaretz. The Neshama should go up, and the illuminations of his soul should have influence upon all of us down here below. Perek Chav Gimel. V'im kol hanal, with everything we said above, which I encapsulated a little bit right after the Yom Yom, Yavour Heitev, can be well explained, the Tosfos Bir, with more explanation, Masha Omru B'Zohar, what it says in the Zohar. The Zohar says, Deraisa b'Kutshabruch Kulo Chad. The Torah and the Holy One, blessed be He, are one. Okay, so this begins, if we want to tap the oneness of Hashem, which is enclosed in everything, but concealed by the Tzimtzum, the oneness of Hashem, which is embedded in our nefesh elokis, which may be metaphors that are used in Chassidus, slumbering, not awake, or hidden. As we've been speaking, the nefesh elokis is the fountain, though it may not be spouting yet, the fountain of the Ava, which is hidden, Ava Misuteris, the love which is hidden in the heart of a person. And it's also the seat of the Koyach Ma, because remember, the nefesh elokis resides, its place of residence, its home is in the brain, and particularly and initially in the right side of the brain, the Koyach Ma, which has, as I've been calling it, the window into the ayin. So, how can you access that? Well, the Torah and God are one. In the Tikkunim Zohar, it says, Pirushe, the following, it explains, the Ramach Pekudim, the 248 positive mitzvahs, Einen Ramach Evoren de Malka, they are the 248 limbs of the king. In other words, that when one connects oneself with the mitzvahs, mitzvah, of course, means commandment, but it's explained in Chassidus, it's from an Aramaic word which means to connect. When one connects with the mitzvahs, one is connecting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. One is tapping that infinite source of energy, and because it's embedded in and it's carried over and brought to us through the Torah. So when one applies all of one's limbs and organs to those mitzvahs, one is making the connection. And that's the electrification. That completes the circuit, that makes the circuit, so that the infinite can become actualized and felt and sensitized in a person's being. The fisha mitzvahs hen penimis v'ratzon elyon, because the mitzvahs, what are they? They are God's inner will, the supernal will. Bechefse hamiti, and they are his true desire. Hamalubish b'chol olamis, and that will, the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that true desire is embedded in all the worlds, the upper worlds and the lower worlds. It's Hashem's ratzon, which enlivens everything. So as a corollary of that, since his will is invested, is the life force of everything, and his will is expressed, what he wants, that's the will, in the mitzvahs of the Torah. So all of the life of all the world, this is a big sentence here, all the life of all of the world depends on the deeds of the mitzvahs, shel tachtainim, of us down here below. The worlds go as we go. The Nimsa comes out, Shemasa ha-mitzvahs, that the deed of mitzvahs, v'kiyuman, and fulfilling them, hulavush ha-panimi l'panimius ratzon elyon, is an inner garment, a panemius garment, like a piece of clothing, but a very deep panemius garment, to the supernal will. Shemamas is there because in the deed of the mitzvah, nimshach or v'chayis ratzon elyon, one is drawing down the supernal will, lihislabish ba'olamis, to be enclosed in the worlds. Therefore, they're called the limbs of the king, derech mashul, by way of a metaphor, just like the limbs of a person, are a garment for his soul. The soul expresses itself through the embodiment of itself in the body, including, as we'll see explicitly in a few minutes, including the mind, the consciousness. Mind, moyach. Moyach is one, although we're using the words limbs here, I'm translating it limbs, evre, because it's usually how it's translated. It includes not only the external limbs, like the hands, right, and the feet, which we walk and do, but also the internal organs as well, including the moyach, the mind. So when we embed ourselves in the mitzvahs, we are bathing ourselves, so to speak, in the waters of Torah, and we are also drawing those waters, those energies, or to use another example, those lights into all the worlds. This is what happens when a person connects himself with mitzvahs. And when you do that, of course, when you give yourself over to a mitzvah, and it's a simple frame of reference, what happens is you're now doing God's will, you're embedded with God's will, and God's will becomes a lavush to your soul, ubetelim legamri, and becomes nullified, your soul becomes nullified to God's will, mikol v'kol, entirely, at the moment that you're embedded in and performing with and tied to and connected to God's will through the mitzvah. Because as soon as it rises up in a person's will to extend one's hand, or his foot, the limbs immediately respond to that will, and immediately without any commandment to them. This is why, for instance, I'm moving my hands at the same time that I'm talking, because as my seichel is involved in talking at the moment and thinking about what I'm going to say, but my hands, I'm not telling my hand to move the way it's moving and gesticulating the way it's moving. It's just doing it because of the fact that the ratzon is embedded in it in a way that moves things automatically without any delay and without any need for intervention of thought. As he says, without any delay at all. But absolutely in the same moment, that it rises up in a person's will that your foot should move, it moves without you thinking about it. But if Baruch Hashem that we should be healthy and all things should work the way they should work. So kach, similarly, that's a mashal, al derech mashal. The chayas shel masa hamitzvahs, the vitality, the life force of all the deeds of the mitzvahs, v'kiyumam, and what keeps them in existence, in batul lagamni lagamri ratzon ha'elyon. They are completely nullified to God's supernal will, hamalubish boy, which is enclosed in those mitzvahs, and nasle mamish keguf l'neshama. And these mitzvahs and these limbs and organs which are performing the mitzvahs, they become like the body to the neshama. The neshama is the ratzon ha'elyon, the supreme will, and this is the pintaliyit. A Jew never wants to ever be separated from Hashem, as that's the Jew's nature, right? And that comes out. This is why the example of Mesiras Nefesh under duress is so useful, because that's also something a person doesn't think about. If you ask the person, would you give up your life if someone said to you that you have to commit this act, which is Avodah Zorah, you would say, I don't know, maybe I would. But when push comes to shove, we don't. Why? Because there's something deeper than maybe I would and maybe I wouldn't. And what I'm thinking about, let me think it over. And it's the Pintal Yid. So this is the awakening of the Pintal Yid through the Moida Ani of today's Hayom Yom, through the unthinkable, unthinking, beyond thinking, deeper than thinking, transcendent connection that we have to God, which comes from putting ourselves in line with what He wants, because His will is our will, ultimately. We are commanded to do it, but that itself is a commandment. The commandment is mitzvah. When it says you're commanded to do His will, you could translate it as connect yourself with God's will, because mitzvah and connection are the same words. Connect yourself with God's will. This is a beginning of a primary instruction of how to access that koyach hachokmah that we've been talking about so much, that ava misuteris that we've been speaking about so much, by connecting yourself with God's will. And God's will now becomes unthinkingly, like the Moida Ani, like the empowerment of the body, like the empowerment of the neshama to move the body. And similarly, the external, most external aspect of the Gevesh Elokis, what's that you have is the Maisa HaMitzvah, the deed of the mitzvah, in the person, Hamakayim ba'oiseh HaMitzvah, in the one who fulfills and does the mitzvah, which is the power of deed. So now your power of deed, not only your power of mind, and I'm not talking here about awareness. Alter Rebbe is not here about cogitating and seichel. He's talking about that transcendent level of the mind, which is the Moida Ani that we spoke about in Hayom Yom today. And that's connected with the deed. That deep connection, that deep energy of the Moida Ani, of the pre-Seichel, higher than Seichel, deeper than Seichel, is what's embedded when you do Maisa Mitzvah. It's your will, you're connected with his will. Kegufla neshama, like a body connected to the soul. And what's the soul? The soul is the Ratzon HaElyon. And in this position, one becomes batal completely, nullified completely to Hashem. Batal a love, completely nullified to Hashem. Yalkein, and therefore, every gufa adam hamakayim mitzvahs. So therefore, the limbs of a person's body, as they are fulfilling mitzvahs, when the power of deed of the nefesh elokis is enclosed in the limbs of the body, the shas masa, at the time that you're doing it, the kiyam ha-mitzvah, and the doing the mitzvahs, then these limbs of the body, limbs, organs, mind, etc., nasu makover mamish l'ratzon elyon, become a chariot to God. And we used this word before. Chariot is like a vehicle which has no will of its own, and only the will of the driver or the rider, the conductor. And so at this point, the body is completely nullified to the will of Hashem when one is connected with and doing mitzvahs. Kigon hayad, like the hand, hamachalecha tzedakah, which gives out tzedakah le'enayim, to poor people, or which does some other mitzvah. It's completely nullified to the Ratzon HaElyon at the time that it's involved in it. Or the raglayim, like the feet, hamahalchis l'davar mitzvah, which go and do, go on mifsoyim, or go to a place where somebody's in need. V'chein hapeh, and likewise the mouth is an organ. It's a limb. We're all classifying limbs, all of the parts of the body, including the internal organs and the mind of the body. The mouth itself, that's speaking, and the tongue, which speaks words of Torah. So remember, learning Torah is Gadol Torah Shemei B'Lidei Masa. Even though we have pretty much, almost entirely emphasized the mitzvahs of deed, there are Chayvus halavaves as well, right? Obligations of the heart, which are mitzvahs, having to do with, well, as we know, with how the things that the prayer, for instance, to arouse the heart in davening. Davening is called a avodah shebalev, and the obligation to davening is a heart mitzvah. And then we have the mind mitzvahs, which is to learn Torah. And Gadol Torah Shemei B'Lidei Ma'aseh. That's the primary learning, connecting with the mitzvah of learning Torah, because Gadol Torah, greatest Torah, because the Torah with the learning of Torah, without the learning of Torah, you won't have the knowledge or the awareness of really what's going on, is particularly as you're learning the side of the Torah, which we're learning in Chassidus. It gives you koyach, and it gives, in addition to being a mitzvah that you're fulfilling, limud Torah, which is a mitzvah, and your mind is, as it were, nullified to the Ratzon Hashem when you're learning that. It's also giving you all the inspiration and the koyach to do the mitzvahs. And certainly when the mouth is speaking Torah, and then the brain, the mind. The mind which thinks into the divrei Torah, in the words of Torah. The yiras shemayim, and the mind which cogitates about avos Hashem and yiras Hashem, ugedulas Hashem, and the greatness of Hashem Baruch Hu. All of these are mitzvahs of thought, or mitzvahs of mind, mitzvahs of the mouth, to speak, be the bartabam, speak about them, and mitzvahs of deed. And this is what our sages have said. So when a person is engaged in these things, in the Moida Ani method, meaning you're just given over, at that moment you're doing it, or you're thinking it, or you're learning it, etc. This is what our sages said, our Avos Ein HaMarkava, the fathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Sarah, Rivka, and Amos, etc. They were all chariots. Chariots, again, had will of totally given over. All of their limbs, all of them, were sanctified and separated from Inyanim Olam Hazeh. Now, don't read this wrong. Of course, they were involved in Inyanim Olam Hazeh, but in the Inyanim Olam Hazeh, as they are spoken about and meant to be done in the context of mitzvahs. They became a chariot only to the will of Hashem all of their days. That's today's Tanya. So in sum, what we've started here to, we've been speaking about all the time, it's the Alter Rebbe is teaching us how this thing to come to align with God and to be a godly human being in the level of Beinoni is something which is Korav Alecha. I'm looking back to the beginning. It's in your mouth and in your heart, and to do them. So we've covered your heart, your mind, your mouth, your limbs, and the short way. Right, he says the short way and the long way is the implementation there. How do you bring that out? Well, this is what we've just started. You're bringing it out through tapping the Moida Ani quality of ourselves to be given over to Torah and mitzvahs, to learn Torah, because it's a mitzvah. Mitzvah is connection. Mitzvah is God's will. So by performing God's will in a steady, kaviistic way, in a fixed way, fixed times for learning, tzedakah every morning, etc. Whatever your fixed way of doing things is, and the spontaneous ways as well, the doing and the speaking and the thinking and the immersing in Torah will activate that fire, that slumbering abativis, that nefesh, that pintele yid, that power of chokhmah sheba nefesh. Any what's out there? A lot of names. Anybody want to say anything? Okay. If it's clear, it's clear. And so what's the bechein? What do we do?
Well, I was going to make a comment.
Oh, please. Yeah.
We come back to this concept of shiftless, of lowering yourself, of putting yourself out of the center of the picture to the periphery so that you can really actually do what you're talking about. Quite challenging to just really give yourself over. You may want to, but you have to really lower your antenna so that you can really receive what God needs you to do all the time and just be given over to it.
I mean, you're absolutely right.
Just a thought.
No, it's an important thought. The less of you, the more of God. But getting that less of you to that less of you position is not so easy. It might be helpful. It's helpful to me to think of today's Yom Yom. When I get up in the morning and say Moeda Ani, it's before I have a chance to get myself into it. Before I'm really there, I'm saying it. So there's a certain mila, and maybe it's part of a practice that one could do to just suspend one's disbelief or one's cognitive faculties. Just go for it and see what happens. Somebody else is talking, but I can't hear you. Go ahead. Or maybe that was just background noise. Okay, so maybe could we translate this into a bechein, and therefore, loche, and therefore I will what? Come on, guys.
I mean, that the mitzvahs is Hashem's pnimius will, and that we are animated by Hashem's inner will. It just gives a more chayas to everything we use our body for. That's a mitzvah.
Yeah. Just, I mean, just think about that, but not too much. Just put that on your mind. That you have, from as soon as we stop this call. I mean, first of all, we're engaged in this right now. I keep saying that a lot. One of the importances of our sessions every morning is we're engaged in the mitzvah of limud Torah, and particularly limud panimius Torah, and the waters are dripping into us. And I think one of the reasons we're all here is because there's a certain pleasure and awareness of the power of that stuff. And so the more we connect with the mitzvahs on all levels, the mitzvah of limud Torah I just spoke about, the mitzvah of tzedakah, giving yourself away, the more practice, back to Sarah's comment about how difficult it is, more practice makes perfect. The more you give yourself away, the easier it is to give yourself away. The easier it is not to respond in anger when someone insults you, etc., and all the ramifications and embodiments of that mitzvah. It's just the more we focus on the practice of mitzvahs, from the cerebral to the transcendent, from the transcendent to the cerebral to the action to the speaking, the more we will not just create the habit, that's important, but really each and every time we do that, as we've learned today, the more we're tapping that essential elikus, which is embedded within us, and which, as we learned before today, that those mitzvahs that we do are really drawing the highest of all the worlds will go. The higher worlds and the lower worlds, he said, are all going according to the ma'aseh of mitzvahs of us down here below. So that should be and could be a tremendous encouragement.
And also that we become a Merkava, just like the forefathers. We always hear that the forefathers were Merkava. Well, we can also be a Merkava.
Absolutely.
When we use our hand to give tzedakah.
Right. And you want to know something? We are. As soon as you reach in your pocket and give that moment, you're a Merkava. And let's have more, and that's a good way of looking at it. I like that. Let's have more Merkava moments. And think about, maybe that's the thing. Think about making more Merkava moments each and every day.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Good. Okay, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.